Chaos. That's the only word that describes what I walked into. The maternity ward echoed with a frantic symphony of a woman in labor, nurses hurrying past with latex gloves snapping against wrists, monitors beeping in sharp, anxious patterns, and the sound of muffled instructions from behind closed double doors. The floors were so polished they reflected the fluorescent lights, and for a moment, as I stepped inside, it felt like the world was spinning too fast for me to catch up. I had just driven through the night, 8 straight hours of dark freeway, fog thick as cotton, and headlights that blurred from exhaustion, because my son called at 1 a.m. and said, "Mom, she's in contractions. It's time." My hands were still stiff from clutching the steering wheel when I rushed through those hospital doors, heart pounding with nothing but excitement and nerves. My first grandchild. My son's first child. A moment I had prayed for, waited for, imagined so many times I knew every version of it by heart. But what happened next, I could never have imagined. I spotted my son first, pacing outside a delivery room, scrubs half-tucked, hair mussed, sweat shining on his forehead. For a split second, he looked relieved to see me. But then her voice sliced through the hallway. Sharp, breathless, coated in ice. She was gripping her belly, curled over in another contraction, but somehow still found the strength to glare at me with a look that could have turned stone to dust. "Why is she here?" she hissed at my son, loud enough for every nurse within 10 feet to hear. Then she locked eyes with me. Direct. Burning. Unfiltered contempt. "Your presence stresses me," she said, voice shaking with pain and something far uglier. "Please leave." The words hit harder than any slap could. A nurse froze mid-step. Another pretended she didn't hear. My son's face crumpled with guilt, but he didn't defend me. He didn't even try. Instead, he placed a trembling hand on my shoulder and whispered, "Mom, please. Not right now. Not right now." I had just driven 8 hours through the night to be here, because they wanted me here, because he called me, because I thought this was family. But now, in front of strangers, in front of staff, in front of their unborn child's first witnesses to life, I was being dismissed like an unwelcome inconvenience. My face burned. My throat tightened. I swallowed hard to keep the tears from spilling. Mothers aren't supposed to cry in front of their children, not even their grown ones. So I stepped back. I nodded. I forced myself to turn around and walk down that hallway, slow and steady, even though I felt like collapsing. But here's the thing about humiliation. Sometimes it plants the seed for justice. Because 3 days later, when the hospital called me about something my daughter-in-law and my son never expected, never even imagined, I finally understood why I had been pushed away. And, trust me, that phone call changed everything. Before I continue, let me ask you this, because I know stories like mine don't just happen to me. Where are you watching from today? Drop your city, your state, or your country in the comments below. I love seeing how far these stories travel, and trust me, you'll want to stay till the end of this one. Because what happened next, what unfolded after that humiliation in the hospital hallway, exposed a secret so shocking, so carefully hidden, that for a moment even I couldn't believe it. Now, let's go back to where all of this really began. To understand why that moment in the hospital cuts so deep, you need to know everything that led up to it. Because this wasn't just about a birth, or a stressful labor, or a misunderstanding. This was months, years, of small wounds I ignored, red flags I brushed aside, and a hope I held onto longer than I should have. My name is Margaret, I'm 62, and I raised my son Daniel alone after his father passed. He was my miracle baby after 3 miscarriages, the quiet child who grew into a gentle man, the kind of boy who kissed me on the cheek every morning in high school and said, "Love you, Mom," before rushing out the door. We weren't just close, he was my heartbeat walking around outside my body. And when he met her, Ariana, I told myself to be grateful. She was polite enough in the beginning, poised, beautiful in that effortless way some women are, and she always talked about family values. But something about her eyes, something in the way they scanned a room, calculating, assessing, put a knot in my stomach I could never fully explain. Still, when your son is in love, you smile. You support. You make space. For 3 years, I tried. Birthdays, holidays, Sunday dinners, I showed up. Even when the invitations became less frequent, even when Ariana insisted they were simplifying and needed more boundaries, even when Daniel's phone calls dwindled from daily to weekly to sorry mom, I'll call later, things are hectic, I stayed patient. Because that's what mothers do. When they announced the pregnancy, I cried, right there in the middle of a Thai restaurant with spring rolls halfway to my mouth. I hugged them both. I bought little yellow booties the next morning. I started knitting a blanket, pale blue, with white trim. I decorated the guest room with a crib, changing table, and rocking chair, imagining late-night feedings when they needed help. Daniel smiled. Ariana didn't. I tried not to notice the way she stiffened when I said, I can't wait to be involved. Or the way she always said, my baby, never our baby, never your grandchild. Or how she insisted on a birthing plan that included only necessary personnel. But 3 weeks before her due date, something shifted. Suddenly, she was sweet, calling me mom, which she had never done. Suddenly, she wanted my input. Suddenly, she texted photos of a nursery and asked my opinion on names. I remember thinking, maybe she's finally opening her heart to me. I let myself believe it. I booked time off from the substitute teaching I still did. I bought her favorite snacks. I packed a small suitcase with clothes and toiletries. And when Daniel called at 1 a.m, breathless, saying, Mom, it's happening. Ariana's contractions just started. I didn't hesitate. I grabbed my coat. I grabbed my keys. I drove through the night, 8 hours of winding highway, rain slapping the windshield so hard I had to lean forward just to see the road, gripping the steering wheel until my knuckles went white. I imagined walking into that room and being welcomed. I imagined holding my son's hand. I imagined whispering to Ariana, You're doing great, sweetheart. I imagined meeting my grandson moments after he arrived. Every contraction that shook her body, every breath she took in pain, I thought I'd be there. I thought I'd be part of the moment. I thought I mattered. But as I found out in that hallway, the one that smelled of antiseptic and white lilies placed on the nurse's station. Even after all the sacrifices, even after the last 3 years of trying, even after giving Daniel my entire heart, Ariana had other plans. And my presence, my love, my intention to be there, she rejected all of it. And what I didn't yet know was this. Her sudden sweetness the week before, her calling me mom, her wanting me to feel included, none of it was genuine. It was calculated, designed. Part of something bigger. Something hidden behind the contractions, the tears, the beeping monitors. Something I wouldn't uncover until 3 days later, when the hospital called me directly, with a question that should have never, could have never, been tied to my name. But we'll get there. For now, just understand this. That humiliation in the hallway? That was only the first crack in a truth that was about to shatter everything. The moment I stepped off that elevator, I felt it, the tension. Not the frantic, expected panic of labor. No. This was different. This was directed tension. Focused. Like walking into a room where your name has been used in a sentence you weren't meant to hear. Daniel was pacing beside the door to labor and delivery room 6. His hands kept raking through his hair, then dropping to his hips, then crossing over his chest. Nervous patterns he used to have as a teenager when he'd done something wrong and didn't know how to tell me. Danny, I whispered. He turned, startled. And there it was on his face, guilt, fear, conflict, all of it wrapped together like tangled wires. Mom, you made it, he said, forcing a smile that immediately faltered. I stepped closer, heart full, arms already reaching to hug him, but before I could even touch his sleeve, a cry tore from inside the delivery room. Ariana. Her voice rose again, sharp with pain, and something else. Anger. Then it happened. The door swung open as a nurse hurried out, and behind her, through the thin slit of visibility, I saw Ariana sprawled on the bed, drenched in sweat, breathing in rapid bursts, clutching her belly. Her face twisted, not just with contractions, but with fury when she saw me. "What is she doing here?" she snapped, pointing at me as if I were a trespasser. The nurse froze, caught between medical duty and the emotional landmine unfolding in front of her. Two other nurses had turned their heads in unison. I could feel their eyes burning into me, silently begging this not to escalate. I swallowed. I drove all night," Daniel said. "I told you," Ariana cut in, voice shaking. "I told you that I only want peace here. Your presence stresses me." Her eyes narrowed. "Please, leave." Her words echoed down the hallway, bouncing off the sterile tiles and into the deeper parts of me. The parts that remembered the sacrifices, the years, the love, the hope. I felt Daniel stiffen next to me. His Adam's apple bobbed as he swallowed. "Babe, maybe she can just stay in the waiting." Ariana screamed again, this time not from a contraction but from pure emotional hysteria. "I said I don't want her here." The nurse closest to the door gently touched Daniel's arm. "Father, we need you inside." Father, not son. In that moment, he was hers. Entirely hers. He glanced at me, eyes softening with helplessness. "Mom, please. Just maybe go for now?" "She's overwhelmed." Overwhelmed. The word stung more than the request. As if I was the problem. As if my existence was a burden. As if the woman who raised him from birth to manhood was suddenly toxic. My throat tightened. I nodded, because what else could I do? Start a scene? Make the nurses uncomfortable? Add to the chaos? No. I stepped back, clutching my purse like an anchor. Ariana, panting through clenched teeth, shot me one last glare before the nurses closed the door again. Humiliation settled on me like a suffocating blanket. Nurses murmured. A passing doctor gave me a sympathetic glance. A couple in the waiting area stared openly. I could feel the heat of shame rising in my cheeks. I turned away and walked slowly down the hallway. Each step heavy, each breath thin. But as I passed the nurse's station, head down, trying not to fall apart, I heard it. A whisper. A mistake. A slip. One nurse talking to another, not realizing I was close enough to hear. "You know, she said earlier she didn't want her mother-in-law in a room because of what she did." "What she did?" the other nurse whispered back. "I thought they said it was family tension." "No," the first responded quietly. "She told us she couldn't trust her mother-in-law. Something about forms." "Forms?" I froze mid-step. "Forms? What forms?" The contraction monitor beeped loudly from inside room 6, but that single word, forms, it lodged itself in my mind like a splinter. I walked out of the hospital that morning with a bruised heart, trembling hands, and a sharp humiliation I tried desperately to swallow. But even through the ache, the exhaustion, the confusion, a strange unease slipped into my chest. Something wasn't right. Something was being hidden. Something had already happened behind my back. And I didn't yet understand what. Not until 3 days later, when the phone rang, when the hospital called me, not my son, not Ariana, not the patient herself. When they asked me a question that revealed something far bigger, far uglier, and far more deliberate than stress. But we're not there yet. This was only the beginning. If humiliation had a taste, it would have been the bitter dryness in my mouth as I walked out of that hospital. The sun was just barely rising, casting pale orange streaks through the clouds, and the parking lot glistened from the earlier rain. I stood beside my car for a moment, gripping the door handle and trying to steady my breathing. I drove 8 hours through the night to be told I caused stress. But I told myself it's labor. Emotions run high. She's in pain. It's not personal. It was the only lie I could bear to swallow. I got into my car, hands trembling, and texted Daniel. I'm outside. Please keep me updated. I'll wait. Daniel, 3 minutes later, I will, Mom. I promise. I waited. And waited. And waited. An hour passed. Then 2. Then 4. Not a text. Not a call. Not even a nurse popping out to say, "The baby is here." I watched families come and go. Fathers rushing in with flowers, grandmothers holding gift bags, friends bringing balloon bouquets. All of them welcomed. All of them embraced. I sat in the parking lot, my phone clutched like a lifeline. He said he'd update me. He promised. By noon, the exhaustion from driving all night began to swallow me whole. My stomach growled. My eyes burned. But I stayed. Because how do you leave when your grandchild is being born, when your son needs you, when your heart is inside that building? At 12:47 p.m., I finally received a message. Daniel, Mom, she's 8 centimeters. It's intense. Please don't come inside right now. I'll let you know as soon as the baby arrives. It wasn't the update I hoped for, but it was something. So I stayed. Another 2 hours passed. Still nothing. Around 3 p.m., I walked into the hospital lobby, telling myself maybe I could leave a note at the nurse's station or ask if everything was okay. Just something. When I approached the desk, the charge nurse looked up. Hi, I'm Daniel Hart's mother. His wife is in labor and delivery. Her expression instantly stiffened. Oh, yes. We were informed. She cleared her throat. They've reiterated that they do not want any visitors at this time. I blinked. Not even waiting room updates? I'm sorry, she said gently. Maybe try again later. Her tone was kind, but her eyes held pity. The kind of pity people give you when they feel sorry that you're being excluded. I thanked her quietly and left. Another disappointment tucked neatly into the growing collection. By 5 p.m., the sky had darkened again, rain tapping against the roof of my car as I sat there in the dim glow of the dashboard. My phone buzzed. Finally. Daniel. She's pushing. I can't talk. My heart galloped. The baby. My grandchild. It was happening. I held on to that hope like a child clutching a blanket. Another hour passed. Another. At 6:18 p.m., I texted again. Me, is he here? Is she okay? No reply. I tried calling. Once. Twice. 3 times. No answer. Finally, at 7:02 p.m., my phone buzzed with a voicemail. Daniel's voice cracked through the static. Hey, Mom. He's here. He's healthy. We're both exhausted. She doesn't want anyone visiting tonight. She's in a lot of pain. Maybe tomorrow. I'll call you later. Maybe tomorrow. Maybe. The word dug into me like a thorn. A grandmother hearing about her grandchild through a voicemail. A grandmother hearing about her grandchild through a voicemail after driving 8 hours through the night. Felt like being handed a photograph of a life you were supposed to be living, then told you couldn't touch it. I sat in the dim of my car for a long time, listening to the rain, turning the voicemail over in my head. Maybe tomorrow. Maybe tomorrow. The phrase echoed like the drip of water in a leaky pipe, small at first, then maddening. By 9 p.m., the hospital parking lot had emptied. I could have gone to my hotel, let sleep take me, and tried again in the morning. That would have been the reasonable thing to do. But something tight and furious had been growing inside me all day. It wasn't just sadness anymore. It was the slow burn of being erased, willingly, publicly, and without explanation. So, I did the only thing that made sense to me in that moment. I walked back inside. The lobby lights were softer at night. A janitor rolled a trash bin past the reception, and the smell of bleach was stronger. I walked up to the nurse's station and explained, again, who I was. The nurse behind the desk flicked through logs on the computer, and then looked up with a face I didn't like. They were discharged, she said, not unkindly, but with the clinical distance people use when telling bad news that isn't theirs to own. Yesterday. They left this morning. My hands went cold. They all left? Today? But Daniel said, Ma'am, it says here they checked out at 9:30 a.m. We have the discharge papers and directions for home care. She tapped the screen. Is there anything else I can help you with tonight? I stumbled back as if struck. Checked out. Without me. Without a word. Without a chance to peek at the nursery window. Without being allowed the dignity of being told. I called Daniel immediately. It rang and rang. When he finally answered, his voice was small and tired. "You took him home?" I asked, suppressing the tremor in my voice. "Yeah," he said. "We thought it was best. She's anxious about visitors. The doctor recommended we just go home." "You took my grandson home without even telling me," I said. Anger made the words blunt and raw. "I drove through the night. I was outside the whole time. You told me to wait." "Mom, calm down," he said. "She was exhausted. It's what she wanted. We'll come by tomorrow." "Tomorrow?" I echoed. "You had the courtesy to tell me they were going home today?" Silence on the line. Then, "Mom, it's complicated. She's been anxious about germs. She's paranoid about visitors." I felt my face flush. Paranoid. Anxious. Those words felt like excuses wrapped in someone else's guilt. "I'm not a visitor, Daniel. I'm his grandmother. I drove 8 hours for this." "I know," he said softly. "We appreciate it. But she's please. Just give us space." That was the plea that broke me. I hung up. I sat in my car in the hospital lot for another hour, staring at the raindrops as if they were tiny accusations. I thought about turning around, driving home, and pretending nothing had happened. I thought about calling a friend to go have a drink, to laugh it off. I thought about the little baby things I'd bought, sitting folded and lonely in my suitcase. But pride is a quiet thing until you drown it in a sudden, decisive action. I packed my bags into the trunk, checked into my hotel, and sat on the bed staring at the wall. They chose to exclude me. The humiliation felt like a wound that would fester if I let it. By morning, that wound had hardened into a resolve. I called the nurse line and asked about paperwork, about whether I could see the discharge record. The receptionist was polite, a little surprised by my insistence, but said she would look. 10 minutes later the phone rang. "Mrs. Hart," the voice said. "This is the billing department at St. Jude's. We have a question regarding the account for Ariana Hart's delivery." My heart did something strange in my chest, expectant, cautious. "Yes," I answered. "We're showing that the financial guarantor for the delivery was entered as Margaret Elaine Hart," the woman said, reading off the name like an unfamiliar sentence. "Can you confirm whether you completed an online financial responsibility agreement authorizing you to be responsible for the maternity charges?" For a second, I thought I'd misunderstood. Then the world tilted. "No," I said, and I meant it so clearly my own voice surprised me. "I did not. I never signed anything. I was on the road all night." The woman's voice grew professional, cool. "Our records show the forms were submitted electronically on November 19th at 11:47 p.m. The signature appears to match the one on file, and the IP address used to submit the forms traces to a terminal within the hospital." My hands went numb. The hallway I'd walked away from yesterday snapped into focus again. The nurses, the whispered staff conversations, the way Ariana had said the word forms. Somebody had signed me up to pay for their delivery for their child for the privilege of excluding me from the moment it happened. And the realization washed over me like cold water. This was not just about being unwanted at a birth. This was deliberate. This was personal. This was planned. I folded myself into my car seat and exhaled. The shame had begun to curdle into something steely. I packed my suitcase again, lighter this time, but with a new cargo, determination. If they wanted to stick me with a bill, they were going to have to answer for how my name got on their forms. If they wanted to humiliate me, I would not go quietly. And with that thought, I started the engine. Because some things you don't walk away from. Some things you drive right back into the storm for. I drove back to the hospital the next morning, not because I wanted to, but because the call from billing had unearthed something ugly, something calculated. And I couldn't ignore it. My hands shook as I walked toward the same automatic doors I'd left humiliated just a day earlier. The lobby was quieter in the early hours. A woman in scrubs walked past with a cup of coffee, a maintenance worker was mopping the entrance, and a receptionist was flipping through a stack of files. Everything looked normal, like yesterday had never happened. But in my world, nothing was normal anymore. I walked up to the reception desk and asked to speak to someone from the billing department. The receptionist nodded and made a quick call. 10 minutes later, a woman in business attire approached. Her badge read Carol, billing supervisor. Mrs. Hart, she asked. Yes, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. Let's talk in my office. She led me down a hallway lined with doors, each leading to small administrative rooms. Hers smelled faintly of peppermint gum and printer ink. I sat across from her, my palms damp. She clicked a few keys on her computer and turned the monitor slightly so I could see. Before we proceed, she said gently, I need to confirm, you did not authorize these charges? No, I said firmly. I never saw these forms. I never signed anything. I wasn't even here. I was driving. She nodded once, briskly, and clicked into a folder. Then you'll want to see this. She opened the digital file tied to the maternity account, Ariana's name, Daniel's name, insurance info, and then, at the bottom, financial guarantor, Margaret Elaine Hart. My name, staring at me, attached to thousands of dollars. Carol clicked again and opened the signature page. There, scribbled in familiar blue ink style, my signature. Or rather, a version of it. The loop in the M was wrong. The slant was slightly too sharp. And yet it was close enough that someone not paying attention might believe it. I didn't sign this, I whispered. Carol nodded again, lips pressed thin. We suspected as much. But it gets more concerning. She opened the metadata tab on the digital file, something most people never knew existed. A list of technical details appeared. Form submitted, November 19th, 11:47 p.m. Submitted from Terminal Number 7, Patient Registration Office. Terminal Number 7. Inside the hospital. Inside the building I wasn't allowed into. At the exact hour, I was somewhere between Bakersfield and the Grapevine, gripping my steering wheel and squinting through rain. How could this happen? I asked. Carol leaned back. Usually, patients handle financial paperwork themselves. But in high-stress cases, sometimes family members complete forms for them. It's against policy, but people do it. Then she met my eyes. But forging a signature? Using someone else's identity? That is fraud. The word hit me like a punch. Fraud. A felony. A crime. But Carol wasn't finished. There's something else, she said, lowering her voice. We reviewed the access log. Records show someone logged into the hospital portal using personal information that isn't tied to the patient. My blood ran cold. Personal information alike mine? She hesitated. It appears so. I sat there, staring at the screen, the truth forming like a storm cloud. Someone had used my address, my full name, my date of birth, my phone number, my insurance ID, my digital signature. Not by accident, not in confusion, not because of stress, but deliberately, intentionally, calculated. Carol reached across the desk and placed a printed paper in front of me, a copy of the fraudulent authorization. Mrs. Hart, based on what you've told me and the evidence we're seeing, this wasn't a clerical mistake. The room suddenly felt smaller. The air felt heavier. Who has access to this information? I asked quietly. Carol gave a cautious, knowing look. Often it's someone close. Someone with access to the family's documents. Someone who might have filled out previous forms. Someone who knew you'd be a convenient guarantor. Ariana. It had to be. The sudden sweetness weeks before the birth. The mom she called me. The sudden shift after the forms were submitted. The hostility. Your presence stresses me. The desire to push me away from a hospital. The whispered word at the nurse's station, forms. My stomach dropped. Carol continued, given what we've seen, I am obligated to escalate this to our fraud investigation team. There will be interviews. Recordings. Possibly law enforcement involvement. Law enforcement. Investigators. For a woman who had just pretended I didn't deserve to meet my grandson. Mrs. Hart, Carol said softly, if you didn't sign this, someone else did. And we need to find out who. I nodded, throat tight. The humiliation I suffered in that maternity ward? That wasn't an accident. It was a smokescreen, a distraction, a cover for something much bigger than I ever imagined. And the quiet fire that had started in my chest ignited into something steady, cold, and determined. They used my name, my identity, my trust. And they had no idea I was about to uncover every last piece of what they'd done. I drove back to my hotel feeling like two versions of myself were fighting inside me. The mother who wanted to cry, and the woman who refused to be played for a fool. Somewhere between the hospital parking lot and the dim hallway leading to my room, a switch flipped inside me. The humiliation, the rejection, the dismissal, all of it hardened into something sharper. If someone had used my identity, lied under my name, forged my signature, then I needed to gather every piece of proof I could. Because this wasn't miscommunication. It wasn't stress. It wasn't a misunderstanding during labor. This was deliberate. This was planned. And it started long before Ariana went into contractions. I locked the hotel door behind me, set my bag on the bed, and took a deep breath. All right, I whispered to myself. Let's begin. I opened my phone and pulled up my GPS history, the little blue highlights showing where my phone had been between November 18th and 19th. There it was. 8:52 p.m. Fresno. 9:46 p.m. Kettleman City. 11:03 p.m. I-5 South. 11:47 p.m. Grapevine area. 1:02 a.m. Approaching Los Angeles. 3:19 a.m. Outside San Diego. And the timestamp of the forged signature? 11:47 p.m. At that moment, I was driving on a mountain pass with barely enough reception to load a map. I screenshot every single timestamp, every location ping, every route map. Then I saved them to a locked folder. Next, I opened my glove compartment and rummaged for what I knew I had. A gas station receipt from 9:45 p.m. A second receipt from a rest stop vending machine around midnight. A credit card charge from the hotel check-in at 3:25 a.m. All of it documented. I was nowhere near a hospital portal at 11:47 p.m. I spread the receipts across the bed like puzzle pieces. Then I opened my texts with Daniel and Ariana. And suddenly a cold realization hit me. 3 weeks before the birth, around the time paperwork is usually updated, Ariana had texted me out of nowhere. What's your full legal name again for the little keepsake book I'm making? What's your birthday? I want to add it to the family tree section. Do you still use the same insurance card from Blue Horizon? Just checking something. At the time I had smiled, thinking, look at her, she's finally embracing me. But now those messages looked different. Calculated. Harvesting information. I scrolled further and found something I had missed the first time. 2 days before her contractions began, she sent me a message that felt innocuous then, and like a warning now. I hope everything goes smoothly. We'll try to get all the paperwork sorted early, so there's no stress later. Paperwork. Sorted. Early. I screenshotted everything. Then I checked my call history. While I was driving through the night, I had made 2 calls to Daniel, one at 10:14 p.m., another at 11:50 p.m. That second call was only a few minutes after the forged signature was submitted. If I were on the phone, I couldn't be submitting forms. Another screenshot. Another file saved. Finally, I remembered something from the hospital hallway. Something Ariana had yelled during a contraction, or maybe during one of her emotional spikes. You're not ruining this again. Again? What had I ruined before? What mistake had she created in her head? What version of me existed in her narrative? I replayed the scene. The tone of her voice, the fury behind her eyes. Something about that moment screamed that her issue with me started long before labor. I wrote it down. Ariana said again. Investigate what she meant. By the time I finished gathering evidence, my hotel room looked like a detective's office. Open laptop. Notes written across a pad. Receipts lined up. Screenshots saved. GPS logs documented. Paperwork printed. Timeline forming. Every piece pointed to one truth. Someone had used my identity intentionally, not accidentally. not in the chaos of labor. This was premeditated. And the more I gathered, the more one terrifying possibility surfaced. What if the reason they wanted me gone from the hospital was because I wasn't supposed to discover the forged documents? What if my humiliation wasn't an emotional outburst, but a distraction? I sat back on the hotel bed, heart pounding, a tightness forming in my chest. This wasn't a family conflict. This was a crime. And whether she intended it or not, Ariana had just made me the first witness against her. And I was nowhere near finished uncovering the rest. The next morning, I walked into the hospital with a folder tucked under my arm, the one filled with screenshots, receipts, GPS timestamps, and printouts. My legs felt steady in a way they hadn't in days. This time I wasn't walking in as a mother desperate for access. I wasn't walking in as a humiliated woman trying to rationalize rejection. I walked in as someone who intended to prove a crime. The billing supervisor, Carol, met me in the lobby. Her expression was tight, professional but troubled. She held a clipboard in one hand and a tablet in the other. "Mrs. Hart, thank you for coming back. There's someone I want you to speak with." Someone. That single word sent a chill through me. She led me down a different hallway this time, past administrative offices, past conference rooms, past a locked door that required a badge swipe. Finally, she stopped at a room labeled Financial Integrity and Fraud Prevention Unit. Inside were 2 desks, a printer, and 3 people. A man in a gray suit typing on a laptop. A woman with glasses reviewing paper files. A tall, broad-shouldered man wearing a badge clipped to his belt. The man with the badge stepped forward. "Mrs. Hart." "Yes." "Detective Rowan. San Diego Police Department. Financial Crimes Division." My breath caught. Not security. Not hospital admin. Police. "We received a report this morning from the hospital regarding a potential case of identity misuse," he said. "Ms. Granger here." He nodded toward the woman with glasses. "Flagged your file. We need to ask you some questions." I nodded, heart pounding. They sat me at a table and placed a digital pad in front of me. "First," the detective said, "I'd like you to sign your name." My confusion must have shown because he added, "We need a comparison." I picked up the stylus and signed, "Margaret E. Hart." He pulled up another screen, the signature from the forged financial guarantor form. Even from across the table, the differences were obvious. The loop in the M. The spacing between letters. The pressure points. A signature expert would need 10 seconds. "That isn't my handwriting," I said firmly. Detective Rowan nodded. "We suspected as much." Then he turned the screen again and showed the signature zoomed in. "It appears to be a traced overlay," he added. "Someone likely copied it from a prior document." My stomach twisted. From what document? And who had access to something with my signature? Then the detective continued, "Let's talk about the night of November 19th. Where were you between 11 and midnight?" I pulled out my phone. "Driving," I said. "Here's my GPS history. Here's a receipt from a vending machine at 11:50 p.m. Here's the call I made to my son at 11:48. His eyebrow lifted with interest. "That aligns exactly with the timestamp of the submitted form." He tapped his pen on the table thoughtfully. "Mrs. Hart, whoever submitted that paperwork intentionally used you as a financial shield." "A shield?" I asked. He leaned back in his chair. "Yes. Every major medical procedure requires a guarantor. Without one, insurance might delay approval, or the hospital might postpone a non-emergency admission. If someone didn't want to provide their own financial information, or couldn't, they might use yours." I felt my face heat with a mixture of anger and disbelief. "You think someone used me so they wouldn't have to pay for the birth?" "That's one possibility," he said. "But I don't think this is just about a bill." His tone dropped lower. "We found something else." The woman with glasses, Ms. Granger, pulled up an access log showing all login attempts tied to the patient's account in the past year. She zoomed in on one line. May 12th, password reset request. Requested by user verified through alternate contact. Alternate contact, Margaret E. Hart's phone number. My head snapped up. My phone number? But I didn't. I know, she said. This is why we flagged it. She scrolled further. June 4th. Insurance information edited. Edited by Patient Authorized Representative. Representative name, Margaret E. Hart. My blood went cold. Edited by me? Authorized by me? Impossible. I hadn't even been in San Diego that week. Detective Rowan leaned forward, folding his hands. Mrs. Hart, someone has been using your identity for months. Months. Not days. Not hours. Not just during labor. Months. I stared at the screen, my pulse thundering. Detective Rowan's voice softened, but the weight of his words hit like steel. And in cases like this, the most common perpetrator is someone within the family circle. Someone with access to information. Someone with motive. Someone who benefits. My breath tightened. There was only one person who had ever asked for my insurance information. Only one person who had asked for my birthday. Only one person who suddenly became sweet, loving, welcoming, right before all the edits happened. Ariana. Detective Rowan slid a form across the table. We're opening an official investigation. But before we proceed, we need you to provide a formal statement. He paused. And Mrs. Hart, I'm going to be blunt with you. He lowered his voice. Whatever is happening here, the birth is just the surface. People don't risk felony charges over a single hospital bill. There's something deeper. And we're going to find out what. The room fell silent. The buzzing fluorescent lights faded into the distance. And for the first time since the contractions began, I wasn't crying. I wasn't pleading. I wasn't humiliated. I was angry, righteously angry. And I was no longer fighting alone. I straightened my back, picked up the pen, and began writing my statement. Because if Ariana thought she could use my identity, erase me from the birth of my grandson, and walk away clean, she had just underestimated the wrong grandmother. I had barely left the hospital parking lot when my phone began to ring. Daniel. For a second, I considered ignoring it, letting him sit in the silence he and his wife had forced me into. But I answered. Part of me needed to hear his voice, even if it shattered me all over again. Mom, he said immediately, his tone clipped, tense, breathless. What did you do? Not how are you? Not are you okay? Not even the baby misses you already. Just accusations. What did I do? I repeated slowly, incredulously. Daniel, I'm the one who was pushed out of the hospital like I was trash. That's not fair, he shot back. Ariana was in pain. She wasn't thinking straight. Oh, she was thinking clearly enough to tell nurses I caused stress, I said. She was thinking clearly enough to ban me from even standing in a hallway. He sighed in irritation, as if I were the burden. Mom, don't start. I laughed, one of those hollow, painful laughs that sounds more like a gasp. I'm not starting anything, I said. But I just left a meeting with the hospital's fraud team and a detective. Silence. Sharp. Instant. What? Daniel's voice dropped an octave. Why were you talking to a detective? Because somebody used my identity, I said, keeping my tone as even as possible. They forged my signature on your wife's maternity financial forms. They changed insurance information in the system using my phone number. They logged in as me months ago. What? That can't be right. Oh, it's very right, I replied. Everything is time-stamped. And, Daniel, those login sessions happened before the birth. Another silence, longer, heavier. Then he inhaled sharply. Mom, please tell me you didn't accuse Ariana of doing this. No, I said. I didn't accuse anyone. The detective drew his own conclusions. What conclusions? Daniel demanded, his voice tightening. That the person who did this had access to my personal information, I said. Someone who asked for my name, my address, my birthday, my insurance card. She was making a family keepsake book, he snapped. I closed my eyes. There it was. The gaslighting. The manipulation. The attempt to rewrite reality. Daniel, listen to yourself, I whispered. Do you believe that? Truly. He didn't answer. Your wife asked for every detail of my personal identity, I continued. Then, weeks later, those details were used to commit fraud inside the hospital. These things are connected. You don't know that, he muttered. I do know, I said, because the detective does. He let out a shaky exhale. Then, the inevitable. Ariana would never do that. It was the same sentence men say when they're hypnotized by love they can't see beyond. When their loyalty becomes blind. When they'd rather sink with a lie than swim with truth. It has to be a mistake, he pressed. A glitch. A clerical error. Something in the system. Daniel, I said softly, they traced the edits to your wife's patient portal login. He froze. I heard it, the moment the ground beneath him shifted, even if only a little. No, he whispered. No, she wouldn't, Mom. She wouldn't do that. Son, I said gently, I know you love her. I know she's the mother of your child. But someone did this intentionally. And whoever it was wanted two things. Free medical coverage. Me far enough away not to notice. No, he repeated, like he could undo reality with repetition. You're wrong. But his voice was trembling. For the first time, doubt crept in. She had nothing to gain, he argued weakly. I took a slow breath. But she did gain something. Didn't she? What? A clean delivery bill. Avoiding insurance complications. Avoiding a credit check. Avoiding her own financial responsibility. Someone used my identity to shield themselves. That doesn't mean it was her. Then who did it, Daniel? I asked. Name one other person who had all my information. A long silence. Too long. Then, she's crying, he whispered, his voice cracking. She says you hate her. She says you're trying to ruin her postpartum. She says this is just another reason she didn't want you at the hospital. There it was, the manipulation, the emotional warfare. And he was the rope being pulled between two sides. Daniel, I said, trying to keep my voice steady, what kind of person gives birth one day and then says the grandmother shouldn't be involved? What kind of person forces you to lie? To block information? To keep me in the parking lot like a stranger? He didn't answer. She's overwhelmed, he said instead. And you going to the hospital investigation team just made it worse. I almost laughed again, this time out of disbelief. Worse? I repeated. I didn't commit fraud. I didn't sign a thing. I didn't ban anyone from anything. I was told to leave the hospital because the truth would have come out if I stayed. Stop it, he whispered. She didn't want me there, I continued, because I wasn't supposed to see the paperwork under my name. I wasn't supposed to be in the room when the nurse asked who signed the guarantor form. I wasn't supposed to catch the lie. Stop, he snapped suddenly, loud, sharp, desperate. His voice cracked in the middle, like something inside him finally broke. Then I heard it. A soft sob. Not mine. His. Mom, he whispered. Please just let us figure this out. Please don't involve the police. My heart dropped. Daniel, I said quietly, the police are already involved. The hospital reported it. This isn't optional. He inhaled sharply, almost like panic. She's scared, he said. She's crying. She says she didn't mean for anything to happen. She says she didn't know about any forms. Then a rustling sound, a muffled struggle, and suddenly her voice cut through the line. Why are you telling her anything? You're supposed to be on my side. Give me the phone now. And then, click. The call disconnected. I stared at the phone, pulse pounding. The mask had slipped. The sweetness had faded. The truth had cracked open. And whatever Ariana was hiding was powerful enough that she was willing to scream through postpartum stitches to keep it buried. But she had made one miscalculation. She thought fear would silence me. She thought humiliation would break me. But all she had done was prepare me for war. Detective Rowan's office smells like coffee and old paper. The fluorescent light hums overhead while a printer spits out another sheet in the corner. He lays a stack of documents on the table as if they were landmines and then slides them toward me. Mrs. Hart, he says, eyes steady. We pulled every incident that involved your details over the last 36 months. What we found isn't an accident.
He taps the top sheet.
The paper is a timeline, clean, clinical, terrifying.
Dates. Names.
Dollar amounts. Locations stretching across 3 states. You said this started months ago, he reminds me. Yes, I respond, voice flat. But I didn't expect this. He pushes the page closer. Under May 12th, a small note reads, Emergency room visit billed to Margaret E. Hart. Patient not located at facility. Dispute filed. Amount, $2,400. Under June 4th, another line. Credit card opened. Name, Emma Hart, sister-in-law. $8,200 charges. State, California. Under August 22nd, auto loan in the name of Jake Flores, cousin. $12,000. State, Texas. Under November 19th, the night of the delivery, the entry is highlighted in red. Maternity delivery billed to Margaret E. Hart, $10,300. Location, San Diego General. My throat tightens. The red mark is loud on the page, like a shout. You see the pattern? Detective Rowan asks quietly. I do. These aren't random clerical errors. They're targeted, calculated. The same family names, the same geographical spread, the same method. Someone creates a story, uses a family connection as cover, and then funnels charges, loans, or claims into the names of relatives. Who are the victims? I ask. He names them, and each name is a punch. Emma Martinez, your son's sister. She reported unauthorized credit cards opened in her name back in March. Jake Flores, your cousin in Texas, who had a car loan taken out without his knowledge. Thomas Reed, a close neighbor, $5,000 medical bill transferred. And several others, people you barely know, who thought their lives were just a paperwork error until accounts started getting declined. How many? I whisper. 6 confirmed victims so far, he says. Preliminary losses exceed $47,000. And we're still tracing transactions. My mind reels. Faces flash through my head. Emma's tearful voice on the phone last year when she couldn't explain charges she didn't make. Jake swearing he never applied for a loan. A neighbor whose credit score tanked because of unknown activity. I had assumed those were isolated scams. I had no idea they were threads in a single, woven plan. Detective Rowan spreads another sheet. This one is even more damning. IP addresses, login times, and device fingerprints. The forensic analyst traced multiple logins to a handful of devices linked to one residence, the address where Daniel and Ariana lived. Every login to the patient portal, every insurance edit, even the fraudulent credit applications, all trace back to devices associated with that home network, Ms. Granger explains, tapping a column of numbers. And there are financial transfers going to a third-party account, small amounts at first, then larger. The money trail leads to several prepaid cards and then to a single payee in another state. My chest tightens. The map of evidence is clear. Someone inside our circle had the access, the opportunity, and the motive to prey on family members. Who's the payee? I ask. Rowan hesitates, then says, We've identified a name connected to a Marcus Webb. A man with a criminal history in financial fraud. He's under investigation in Seattle. The transfers to his accounts line up with several of the fraudulent charges. My skin crawls. The air in the room seems thinner. So, it's not just someone in our family? I say. It's a network, the detective finishes. A ring, possibly. Perpetrators like this often work with others. They recruit inside relationships. They look for people with emotional access and exploit that trust. I imagine the months before the birth, the sudden warmth, the questions for keepsakes, the requests for insurance details. Suddenly what looked like politeness now reads like reconnaissance. And Ariana? I ask. Where does she fit in? His jaw tightens. Right now, the nexus of activity pulls toward the household. Devices, transactions, and timeline place a lot of activity there during the windows in question. We're not accusing anyone yet. We follow evidence. But we have reason to believe someone with intimate access, someone who lived in that address, was at least facilitating these activities. Emma's name flashes in my memory, silent, startled when bills arrived. Jake's voice on the phone. I never applied. And the neighbor, Thomas, emptied and ashamed, apologizing for something he didn't do. This is all horrendous, I say. But why target us? Why our family? Rowan leans forward. Because you are vulnerable. Because you have assets. Because you have social visibility. Because people in your orbit post birthdays, anniversaries, photos that include full names, dates, and, dangerously, phone numbers and addresses. Scammers use that data. It's social engineering. It's the method we see most often. Gather details from posts, use them to answer security questions, open accounts, and go to work. My stomach twists. Images of family gatherings cascade. Birthday cakes with full names spelled out, Facebook posts listing baby names, Instagram captions with hometowns and schools. I had shared those without thinking of consequence. Had we all been exposing ourselves? Rowan adds, what makes this case unusual is the brazenness, using a trusted family connection as a guarantor. And the scale. We're looking beyond a single opportunistic fraud to a pattern that suggests planning and intent. He slides a photo across the table. Security camera stills of someone hunched over a laptop in the hospital waiting area at 11:52 p.m., just minutes after the financial form was submitted. The silhouette is familiar, a woman's profile, long hair tied back. The timestamp aligns with the red-highlighted maternity billing entry. My pulse thunders in my ears. I begin. It's not conclusive, Rowan cautions. But combined with device logs, messages, and the pattern of victimization, it's probable cause to interview members of the household. Interview them? I echo. You mean her? Yes, he says. We'll need statements. We'll need cooperation. And we may need to expand to federal authorities if connections to Marcus Webb and interstate transfers hold. At the word federal, my world tips further. David will be devastated. I whisper. If this is true, if she's involved, what does that mean for him? For Nathan? Detective Rowan's expression is unreadable. We're mindful of family impact. But crimes against people, especially your family, have to be addressed. We're trying to stop further victimization and prevent this from spreading. I press my fingertips to the table, feeling the edges of the paper bite into my skin. The realization settles like frost. This is no longer a private humiliation to swallow. It's a net of crimes that could ruin lives, credit, futures. And worse, if this web was left uncut, someone could use my family's names again, and again, and again. I stand up slowly, the folder of evidence seeming heavier now than in the morning. Do what you need to do, I say. Find the truth. Detective Rowan nods. We will. But be prepared. This will get messy before it gets cleaner. People don't like being exposed. As I walk out of the fraud unit, the corridor seems longer than before. Each step echoes. Each reflection in the window turns my face into someone I barely recognize. A net has been thrown over us. And somewhere inside that net, a person I loved and trusted might be pulling the strings. The knock on my door felt like it was made of glass, soft but urgent. When I opened it, Daniel stood there with red-rimmed eyes, his shirt rumpled, a duffel bag at his feet, and Nathan. Our tiny, perfect, furious little life, curled against his chest in a blanket patterned with little blue whales. For a second, I didn't speak. I could see everything in him. Sleeplessness, fear, shame, and the raw, aching love of a man who'd suddenly been thrust into a place he'd never imagined, fatherhood under a cloud. He looked smaller in person than on the phone, more human. The stoic son I'd known all my life had been stripped down to the marrow. Mom, he started, voice hollow. Can we come in? I need to talk. I stepped aside wordlessly. He closed the door behind him, then sat on the edge of the couch, cradling Nathan as if the baby's tiny heart could steady his own. I brought him here because I couldn't be home, he said. Everything's a mess there. Ariana, he swallowed hard. She's furious. She keeps saying it's a misunderstanding.
But the police, they came by.
The hospital, they already started asking questions. They said it looked deliberate. His hands trembled as he shifted the blanket and placed Nathan, warm and small, into my arms. I had pictured this moment 1,000 times. The weird, sacred silence of holding a newborn, the soft sighs, the smell of baby soap and milk. Reality hit me in a way dreams never did. Nathan's tiny fingers clenched my thumb. His eyelashes were so fine they barely cast a shadow. Oh, sweetheart, I breathed. Everything else, the humiliation, the stolen signatures, the town of lies, washed away for that instant. He was smaller than I'd imagined, and somehow more real. I felt something fracture and mend all at once. Daniel's breath hitched.
I'm so sorry, Mom, he said.
I should have told you. I should have protected you.
He was pleading with himself as much as with me.
The guilt in his voice was sharp, a knife turned inward. You didn't protect me. I corrected softly, but not cruelly. You didn't even try to understand what was happening. He flinched at the truth, then crumpled. The wall he'd been holding up gave way. Tears spilled down his face, hot, unstoppable. He buried his face in his hands and let himself unravel in a way I'd never seen. I thought she was different, he sobbed. She seemed so sweet. She wanted to bring us together. She put me between you and her. I thought I was doing the right thing by calming things, by choosing peace. I didn't want to make her feel worse. I didn't want the baby to be stressed. But I should have asked more questions. I should have listened to you. The apology hit me like rain. All those years of guiding him, worrying, staying up nights, everything condensed into that one broken, vulnerable confession. He lifted his head and looked at me with eyes I'd thought were impossible to break. Mom, if this is true, if she did this, what does that mean for us? For Nathan? For our lives? I held the baby tighter, feeling his heart beat against my palm, steady as a promise. It means we don't let lies make decisions for us, I said. It means we follow the truth, even when it hurts. It means we protect him. He nodded, tears still streaming. I don't know how to be both his father and to face what might happen to her. You don't have to figure it out alone, I told him. You have me, and you have to be honest. If you love him, you'll do the right thing. That might be painful, but it's what makes a home something he can trust. He sobbed again, a softer sound now, remorse, not theatrics. He reached out and took my hand, gripping it so tightly it hurt. Will you forgive me? He whispered. I studied him. The worried lines, the boy who used to carve toy cars on the kitchen table, and felt the old, unconditional current of love. I already did, I said. But forgiveness doesn't mean we look away. We face what's true. He nodded, a small, almost imperceptible acceptance. Then he exhaled and, for the first time since this nightmare began, his shoulders lowered as if a weight had been set down. We sat together in the quiet, the city noise muffled outside the window, while Nathan slept against my chest. For a moment, that tiny sleeping face steadied everything. Decisions to come, courtroom benches, investigators, family fights. In the hush, I allowed myself a small, stubborn hope that truth would lead to protection, not destruction, that the baby's life would remain innocent even if the adults around him had to pay for their sins. Daniel looked up finally, wiping his face on his sleeve. Mom, he said, will you be honest in court? Will you tell them what you know? My jaw set. The road ahead would be brutal. There would be testimony, cross-examination, and the ugly business of proving a lie. But the warmth of Nathan's small hand curled on my finger was all the courage I needed. Yes, I said. I'll tell the truth. I'll show them the receipts, the timestamps, the messages. I'll sit in that courtroom, and I'll say what happened. For him. He nodded, new resolve settling into his face like armor. We sat together until dusk, while the baby breathed and the world felt, in that small room, temporarily right. The breakdown had happened. The truth had cracked the fragile veil that had kept everyone pretending, but from that fracture, something real was beginning to grow. Accountability, clarity, a family that might, someday, be rebuilt on truth rather than lies. And as Nathan shifted in my arms, I whispered into his hair, "I promise you, little one, I will do everything in my power to keep you safe." He blinked sleepily, a tiny mouth forming a perfect O, and, for a breathless second, everything felt worth the fight. The courthouse descended on me with a different kind of hush than the hospital. Here, the air smelled of old wood and paper, of decisions made and lives rearranged. Cameras clustered outside the steps by noon. Reporters whispered into phones, their breath making little clouds in the chill air. I felt like something from a drama as I walked in, but the truth was rawer than anything television could script. The courtroom itself was surprisingly ordinary. High wooden benches, sunlight slicing through tall windows, a stern dais where the judge sat like an island. People filed in. Family members, a few local reporters, the prosecutor's team in dark suits, and across from them, a small cluster that included Jessica's attorney. Daniel and I sat together in the front row, Nathan in his carrier with a babysitter watching in a gallery, eyes wide and curious. When the clerk announced the case, the sound of the courtroom seemed to hollow out. United States versus Jessica Marie, number 2025, CR 0472, the clerk intoned. My legs felt unstable. I gripped Daniel's hand so hard I could feel his pulse. A woman beside me pressed a tissue into my palm. I hadn't realized I was shaking until then. The prosecutor, sharp, precise, and calm, rose and began to lay out the case with the ruthless clarity of someone who'd spent months turning chaos into a timeline. "Your Honor," she said, "the defendant is charged with multiple counts of identity theft, wire fraud, and conspiracy. The government's evidence will show that over an 18-month period, the defendant accessed protected information belonging to multiple family members, submitted fraudulent financial responsibility forms, and diverted funds for personal gain." She walked through a slate of evidence we'd already seen in police interviews, but never so meticulously arranged in public. Login timestamps, IP addresses, bank transfers, surveillance photos. Every item was a bead on a string, each one leading back to the same house, the same devices, and the same pattern. Then the defense stood up. Jessica's attorney was younger than I expected, smooth in a way that felt practiced. He spent his opening weaving a different story, one of stress, a confused mother, a woman overwhelmed by childbirth and postpartum hormones. He spoke of misunderstanding, clerical error, compassion. "Ms. Webb is a new mother," he said, voice honeyed. "She is overwhelmed, frightened, and should not be prejudged in the court of public opinion. We intend to show there is no direct evidence linking Ms. Webb to the alleged financial transactions." The courtroom rustled. Reporters' pens moved faster. My stomach tightened. The first witness called was the hospital billing supervisor, Carol, whose testimony unfurled in crisp, careful paragraphs. She explained how the form had been submitted, how signatures were compared, and how the system logged the terminal location. She explained the difference between an emergency contact and a financial guarantor. And when the prosecutor asked about the IP logs and terminal number 7, Carol pointed to the surveillance frame, a still image of someone hunched over a laptop in the waiting area at 11:52 p.m. The defense piped up about lighting and angle and poor camera quality. But the image lingered, the silhouette unmistakably familiar. Then came the digital forensic analyst. He walked the jury through data, login hashes, device fingerprints, MAC addresses, and transaction trails. He explained in plain language how the same device ID accessed the patient portal on 3 separate occasions to change insurance information, edit contact details, and submit financial forms. He explained how small transfers were routed through prepaid cards to obscure their destination. When he said the name Marcus Webb and the jury shifted like something had brushed them, I felt the room tilt under my feet. When it was my turn to be called as a witness, I felt every eye like a physical weight. I practiced my breath at the rail and then spoke, truthful, direct, sometimes faltering with the memory of humiliation and the memory of tiny fingers curling around my thumb in my hotel room. I told them about driving all night, about being told to leave the hospital hallway, about waiting in my car for hours. I described the texts, simple, polite messages from Jessica asking for my birthday and insurance details, and the sudden sweetness that came right before the forms were edited. I explained carefully how I compiled gas receipts, GPS pings, call logs, and screenshots, and how they proved I could not have been the one to submit those forms. Cross-examination was harder. The defense attorney tried to plant seeds: inconsistency, confusion, motive. He asked if I'd ever had disputes over bills in the past. He asked if I'd ever been forgetful with paperwork. He implied, softly, efficiently, that perhaps I'd been careless with my documents. But I answered the questions in the same steady, careful voice I'd used to gather the evidence. My receipts were dated. My GPS history was time-stamped. My calls were logged. The truth has a way of standing firm under cross-examination when it is built from facts rather than emotion. The most wrenching moment came when the defense called Jessica herself to testify. She sat small and contained at the witness stand. Her voice shook, her lips trembled. She looked like a woman frayed by labor and the public gaze. She smiled at Daniel briefly, then looked over at me with eyes that flickered, calculated, desperate, human. "Did you submit those forms?" The prosecutor asked bluntly. "No," she answered. "I didn't mean to. I was in labor. I must have been confused. It was a mistake." Her lawyer stood and argued emotion, hormones, panic, poor judgment. He painted her as a sympathetic, fallible new mother. He asked the jury to consider mercy. But then the surveillance footage was shown in higher resolution. The image of the woman at terminal number 7 sharpened, hair back, profile distinct. A forensic analyst highlighted mouse movement patterns that matched activity from a device registered to the Martinez household. A phone record showed brief bursts of data activity from the DIL's phone near the time of the submission. The gallery murmured. The jury exchanged looks. Jessica's composure cracked, tears, sudden and loud. Yet in that moment, her eyes darted to me and burned with something that was not sorrow so much as calculation. The prosecutor closed with the thing that struck deepest: motive. "Why," she asked, "would someone go to such lengths? Not for a little convenience. Not for a clerical mistake. For money. For gain. For a pattern of theft that trawls through family trust. That is why we are here." Outside, cameras flashed. Inside, a hush that felt brittle settled over the room. The judge's expression was unreadable, but I could tell she felt the gravity of it all. As I walked out of the courtroom that day, the public eye followed me, condensed, clumsy, unsympathetic, but inside, something else stirred. The system had begun to do what it was designed to do: expose a pattern, bring it to light, and force answers. The battle was far from over. Evidence would be contested. Witnesses would be re-examined. But the bones of the story were laid bare, and for the first time since the humiliation in that hallway, I felt the distinct, clear pulse of hope. Shaky, but real. Because truth, when it's laid out in cold print and sworn testimony, has its own gravity. And in that gravity, accountability begins to move. 2 weeks after the hearing, I received a call from Detective Rowan that began with 7 words no mother expects to hear. "Mrs. Hart, we uncovered something disturbing." I shut off the stove, heart thudding. "What is it?" "We dug deeper into the defendant's past," he said. "Far deeper than what she disclosed to your son. Or to the court." I swallowed. "What do you mean?" Rowan exhaled the way people do when they're about to drop news that cannot be undone. "Her name isn't Jessica Marie." The room tilted. "What?" I whispered. "That's an alias she adopted 6 years ago," he continued. "Her legal name, her real name is Caitlin Matthews. And under that name, she has a sealed juvenile record, unreported liens, and 2 prior fraud investigations in different states." My knees nearly buckled. "Fraud investigations?" "Yes." "For what?" "Identity manipulation, misuse of benefits, falsifying official forms, similar patterns to what she's accused of now. My skin prickled. And the sealed record? I asked. We're petitioning it to be opened, Rowan replied. But preliminary notes indicate she was involved in a scheme at 17, one that involved stealing financial information from a foster family she stayed with temporarily. I gripped the counter, my breath shallow. You're telling me, I said slowly, that she's done this before? More than once, he said. She's moved across states, changed her name, rebuilt her identity. The new name and the marriage to your son helped her embed herself securely. But the patterns never stopped. I pressed a hand over my mouth. The image of her in labor flashed through my mind. Not the pain, not the screaming, but her stare. The cold, measured, assessing stare. The threat behind it. The control. Does my son know? He will, Rowan said gently. We're bringing him in. Daniel came over that evening, baby Nathan in a carrier and exhaustion draped across his shoulders like a heavy coat. He sat at my dining table as I wiped down the surface, needing something to do with my hands. What did they find? He asked, voice thin. I hesitated. They uncovered her past. Her real past. He frowned. What do you mean real? Her name isn't Jessica, I said softly. It's Caitlin. For a moment, he just stared, confusion knotting his brow. Then the words landed. She changed her name? Yes. Why? To hide, I said, sitting across from him. To hide from her past. He blinked, then blinked again, longer, slower, like his mind was swimming. From what? He whispered. I told him everything Rowan told me. The foster home. The stolen credit cards. The identity manipulation. The fraud investigations. The sealed record. Every piece of her past that had been buried like a landmine was uncovered by the investigation, one after another exploding under Daniel's feet. He buried his face in his hands. Oh God. I didn't know. I didn't know any of this. Of course you didn't, I said gently. She didn't want you to know. He lifted his head, eyes red. Mom, she told me her parents were strict, but loving. She told me she was private. She said she changed her last name because she wanted a clean break from her family after a falling out. I believed her. I reached across the table and squeezed his hand. You loved her, I said. You trusted her. You weren't stupid. You were kind. He let out a breath that cracked in the middle. What else? He asked. I hesitated. Daniel, the detective, thinks she wasn't working alone. His eyes widened. Another person has been identified, I said. Someone named Marcus. Someone she's tied to financially. Someone with a history of running identity rings. He stared at me, shaken. They think she targeted us? Yes, I said. They think you were the stability she needed. The image of a clean life. And my voice faltered. I was accessible. Trusting. A grandmother excited about a baby. You were a target, he whispered. His voice cracked again, this time with fury. She used my family. She used me. There are few things more heartbreaking than watching your child realize they have been living inside someone else's deception. It doesn't mean you were weak, I told him. People like her prey on good people. They use affection as a shield. He stared into the distance. All the months she kept me from you, he murmured. All the times she said you hated her, all the fights she started after visiting you. He shook his head slowly. She was isolating me. She was isolating us. Yes, I whispered. That's what people like her do. Nathan fussed softly in his carrier, and Daniel lifted him into his arms. He rocked him gently, tears slipping down his cheeks. Quiet tears, the kind that come from realizing your life has been built on someone else's foundation of lies. This was never about stress, he said. Never about the birth. She pushed you away so you wouldn't see what she was doing. I nodded. She didn't want me in the hospital, I said, because I wasn't supposed to discover the forged forms. He held Nathan tighter. What do we do now? He asked. I looked at my grandson, small, innocent, untouched by the wreckage swirling around him. We do what's right, I said. We protect him. And we tell the truth. He nodded slowly, resolve hardening in his expression. She thought she buried her past, he said quietly. But it's coming out now. And as he rocked his son, face tight with hurt and betrayal, I realized something chilling. Everything we'd been through so far. The forged forms, the humiliation, the shouting, the lies, was only the beginning. Because exposing her past wasn't the end. It was the door to something even darker waiting behind it. The investigation was already a storm, but what came next was the lightning strike that split the sky open. 3 days after Daniel learned about her real identity, Detective Rowan called again. I was in the living room folding Nathan's tiny clothes, onesies covered in bears and stars, when my phone buzzed. Mrs. Hart, Rowan said, his voice heavy. We have a development. A major one. My pulse spiked. What is it? It's not just your family anymore, he said. This involves multiple counties, fraudulent tax returns, medical identity swaps, and a series of insurance claims tied to the same alias, Jessica Marie. Insurance claims. Plural. I think you should come in, he added. It's better if we explain this face to face. My heart stuttered. Insurance fraud? Tax filings? Multiple counties? This was bigger than stolen credit cards or forged hospital forms. Daniel met me outside the precinct, his face drawn, jaw clenched. Nathan was in his carrier on his chest. We exchanged no words, just a look that said brace yourself. When we entered the investigation room, Ms. Granger and Detective Rowan were standing beside a corkboard that looked like something from a crime documentary. Red strings, pinned photos, stacked documents, timelines, and bold letters that made my blood chill. Identity ring, primary suspect, Caitlin Jessica Matthews. Rowan nodded for us to sit. We pulled records from the other states, he began. Oregon, Nevada, Arizona. And what we uncovered is not the work of someone acting alone. This is part of a broader pattern, one consistent with organized financial fraud. My breath caught. We found 8 fraudulent insurance claims, he continued, flipping the page, filed under aliases connected back to Caitlin Matthews. Daniel's hands began to shake. Insurance claims for what? Rowan pulled up a document showing claim types. Emergency room visits, specialist appointments, prescription plans, diagnostic imaging, maternal care. She filed for benefits she never received, he explained, using other people's names, information gathered through social access, vulnerabilities, and trust. Oh God. She accessed your insurance months before the birth, Mrs. Hart, he added. Edited your details so she could file reimbursements. I pressed a hand to my forehead. She filed claims under my insurance? Yes. Thousands of dollars worth. The room began to spin. But that's not everything, Rowan said. The pattern of identity use strongly correlates to previous investigations tied to a man named Marcus Webb, someone with a documented history of recruiting individuals to gather personal data through relationships, social media, and intimate access. Daniel's voice cracked. You mean she was working for him? Rowan paused. We believe she was working with him. And at times under him, financial ties, shared accounts, overlapping IPs, that's all there. Daniel sat back in his chair, stunned. So all this time, I was living with someone involved in a criminal ring? Yes, Rowan said. And we have evidence she attempted to open 3 accounts under your name, but failed due to security flags. A cold wave rippled through me. She targeted you? I whispered. Consistent with her MO, Rowan said, she isolated you, controlled access around you, and acquired your personal details under the guise of familial closeness. I felt sick. My stomach twisted into a hard knot. Then Rowan dropped the bombshell. She was preparing to file another claim, one involving your grandson Nathan. Daniel jerked upright. What? Rowan nodded gravely and slid a form across the table. It was partially filled and signed, but ready to submit. Infant Medical Specialty Plan, Primary Insured, Nathan Hart. Guarantor, Margaret Hart. My blood turned to ice. They were going to file insurance claims using my coverage for his treatment without him needing any Rowan added. Daniel's face contorted in horror. She was going to use my baby, he whispered, voice breaking. Yes, Rowan said. Children are lucrative targets in identity rings. Their clean credit history, absence of financial records, and unmonitored identity status make them vulnerable. Her next move was to use him. Everything went silent. It felt like the floor had fallen away. She didn't just target me. She didn't just target my family. She didn't just use our identities. She was preparing to use a newborn, her own child, as a tool in a criminal scheme. Daniel stood abruptly, pacing with shaking hands. No, this can't be real. She loves him. She absolutely loves him. Rowan shook his head with the cold neutrality of someone who'd seen this before. She loves what he represents, he said. Financial opportunity, legal leverage, emotional control. Criminal participants often use loved ones, not because they don't care, but because they rely on affection as a shield. Daniel leaned against the wall and pressed his forehead into his arm, shoulders trembling. Nathan let out a soft cry, sensing his father's distress. I went to Daniel and placed a hand on his back. I'm sorry, I said softly. I know this is unbearable. He didn't look up. She would have risked everything, he said, voice hollow. Risked him, risked me, risked our lives. Rowan cleared his throat softly. Daniel, there's more. Daniel lifted his head, eyes wet and exhausted. We obtained additional evidence from the suspect's devices, Rowan said. There were emails, drafts, not sent yet, between the suspect and Marcus Webb. He handed us printed copies. The subject line read, Need full access. He'll believe anything. Below that, baby will make everything smoother. He's attached to her. Use it. My breath left my body in a rush. Daniel stared at the page as if it were written in fire. She was using me, he whispered. And Nathan, I said gently. And our entire family, Rowan added. Daniel sank into a chair, covering his face with both hands. It was too much, too monstrous, too calculated, too cruel. But the worst was still ahead. Rowan set down a final folder. She had a plan to move to another state, he said quietly. Within weeks, she'd already researched apartments in Arizona under her former alias. She looked up daycare centers. She contacted utility companies. She had a schedule. I swallowed, breath trembling. Was she taking Nathan? Rowan nodded once. Yes. Daniel made a sound I can't even describe, something primal, wounded, broken. She was going to disappear, he whispered. With him. And with your identities, Rowan added. Likely to continue the ring. It hit all at once. The sudden sweetness. The meticulous planning. The control over labor. The your presence stresses me. The forged forms. The isolation. The timing. The secrecy. She wasn't pushing me away out of emotion. She was removing the only person who might see through the scheme before she could vanish. I steadied myself, the truth settling in like cold steel. She tried to cut me out. I whispered, because I was the only one who could expose her. Rowan exhaled. And you did. Daniel reached for Nathan, holding him tightly against his chest, tears streaming freely now, not just sadness, but fury, relief, grief, and a desperate, trembling gratitude. She was going to steal my child, he whispered. No, I said softly, placing my hand on his arm. She's not going to, because we're here now, and because the truth is on our side. He nodded slowly. She underestimated the wrong grandmother, he murmured, echoing the words I had once said to myself. And in that moment, the weight of everything, the lies, the forged documents, the stolen identities, the devastating deception, shifted. We were no longer victims. We were witnesses. We were protectors. We were the wall between Nathan and the criminal ring that had almost swallowed him whole. The day of the final hearing arrived with a sharp, metallic air of winter. A cold that seemed to slice straight through coats and bravado alike. But inside the courthouse, something in me felt strangely warm. Maybe it was resolve. Maybe it was purpose. Maybe it was knowing that this time, I wasn't walking in alone. Daniel stood beside me, Nathan's tiny hand peeking out from the edge of his blanket, his quiet breath soft against the hush of the courtroom. I pressed a kiss to his hair and whispered, "You're safe," because for the first time since he was born, I felt certain it was true. The courtroom was filled again. The prosecutor's team, the officers from the Financial Crimes Division, 2 FBI analysts who had stepped in after evidence crossed state lines, and the defense, smaller now, scrambling, realizing the narrative they had built was collapsing under the weight of procedural truth. When Caitlin, was brought in, she looked hollow. Not fragile, not remorseful, hollow, like someone who had been living on lies long enough that reality now starved her. She avoided my gaze entirely. She couldn't avoid Daniel's. His stare was a storm held back by the thin thread of fatherhood. The prosecutor began. "Your Honor, the evidence is overwhelming. Documented identity theft across 3 states. Fraudulent insurance claims. Attempts to obtain financial services under multiple family members' names. Communication with a known criminal partner. And an attempted insurance filing naming the infant son, Nathan Hart, as a subject." A quiet gasp rippled through the courtroom. "We request formal charges under federal jurisdiction. Identity abuse involving a minor carries heightened sentencing guidelines." The defense launched desperate objections. No intent, hormonal impairment, postpartum overwhelm, selective memory. But every objection fell under the heavy gravity of evidence. Timestamps, IP logs, signed forms, financial statements, messages recovered from her email drafts. Judge Harlan listened patiently, but I could see in her eyes the steel forming. At one point, the defense tried to argue that Caitlin's erratic behavior stemmed from the emotional chaos of labor. The prosecutor cut through that with a single line. Her identity ring activity began 6 years ago, long before she ever met the father of her child. Silence snapped shut like a door. The judge turned to Caitlin. Her voice was calm, but it rang like iron. "Ms. Matthews, do you have anything you wish to say before this court?" For the first time, Caitlin looked up, not at me, not at Nathan, but at Daniel. Tears welled in her eyes. She tried to muster the trembling vulnerability that had fooled him so many times before. "Danny, I was scared," she whispered. "I did what I had to for us. For our family. You have to believe me." But something had changed in Daniel. Something had grown. Something had been forged under betrayal and rebuilt under truth. He didn't break. He didn't soften. He looked at her with eyes full of clarity and said, "You didn't do it for us. You did it for you. And you almost took my son with you." The courtroom absorbed the blow in stunned silence. Then the judge delivered her decision. "Based on the evidence presented, I am ordering the transfer of this case to federal custody. Ms. Matthews will be remanded without bail due to flight risk and her documented attempts to assume false identities. Further, restrictions are placed to prevent any contact with the minor child, Nathan Hart, until a full custody and safety evaluation is complete." It was over. Not emotionally, not spiritually, but legally, officially, the machinery that had protected her for years had finally collapsed. As deputies escorted Caitlin out, she locked eyes with me for one brief, venomous second. But that look didn't scare me. It didn't hurt me, because it was powerless now. She was powerless now. For the first time, she no longer held the strings. That evening, in the quiet of my living room, I rocked Nathan in my arms while Daniel cooked a simple dinner. The house felt warm again, warm in a way that wasn't physical, but spiritual. Real. Safe. I whispered into Nathan's soft hair. "You're safe, because we spoke the truth." He stirred, breathed against my collarbone, then settled. Daniel came over, voice low, reverent. "Mom," he said, "you saved us." I smiled faintly. "No," I answered. "I did what any mother would do. I refused to let darkness pretend to be family." He nodded, tears rising. "You're our hero," he whispered. And maybe for the first time in my life, I believed him. because justice had prevailed. Truth had stood tall, and the family she tried to dismantle had rebuilt itself stronger than ever. Thanks for listening. If you have a story like this, share it in the comments. Your voice deserves to be heard.